A couple weeks back, I made a video comparing the S20 Ultra camera to the iPhone 11 Pro and the Pixel 4. And that was part 1 of this series looking at the S20 Ultra's camera. Part 2 is a full review of the S20 Ultra. If you missed that video and you want to know more about the phone or see other camera samples, I'll link that in the description of this video to check out after you watch this one. But this video is part 3, and we're going to be looking at the low light performance and also the high resolution picture performance, and then some super steady video. So there's a lot to cover, and I'm ready to do it. I went out and I shot a lot of photos for it, and I do want to note before we dive in, there is an update coming for this phone. There's been some reported issues from reviewers like me, and Samsung knows and they're coming out with an update. But right now it's March 9th and I have not received the update yet. So I'm still on the most current March 1st update. When I receive that update, I'm gonna write a pinned comment to let you know what happened with it. And if the update is significant enough that it actually provides positive improvement, then I'll make another video revisiting this. But I know that I've been getting a lot of, where's the next part of this series? And a lot of people have pre-ordered or ordered a phone already and they wanna know. So I wanna provide that information right now, the best information I have at this moment. So that's what this video is going to be. And then when there's an update, I'll update you. All right, let's dive right in. So the S20 Ultra has a kind of an interesting setup where it has an 108 megapixel primary camera, but by default it has pixel binning, which is basically in a 9:1 ratio, making the photo a 12 megapixel photo. So the pixels are actually larger and it should help with low light performance and sharpness and stuff like that. And it does. And then you can also actually use that 108 megapixel mode. So in the first video I made, I did not use that mode, and a lot of people wanted to see that mode, so I saved it for this video so I can kind of compare the two. My overall thoughts on the mode, and you'll see it throughout the video, is that it does well, but it's not always a significant improvement to warrant the larger file size. And also in low light, it seems that the 12 megapixel mode is just a lot better, which actually makes sense because pixel binning should help in low light. But overall, it's really cool to have that much detail, and if you want to zoom in a lot, 108 megapixels is awesome. In a similar fashion, the front-facing camera has a 40 megapixel camera that can use pixel binning and get to a 10 megapixel photo. But what I've actually noticed there, again, is the same thing, that unless you're in like really bright light, you're best off using the pixel binning and it will actually help you with the photo. You're going to see why as we go through these photos. All right, I feel like that's enough explaining for now. I'm going to actually dive into the photos, and you should know that beauty mode is turned off, and that's going to be important for when I mentioned skin smoothing. But let's dive right in. Okay, so the first image was shot in that 108 megapixel mode. So both of these photos look really good from the initial look. This is with the 108 megapixel sensor, but they both blew out the sky in the back, which is unfortunate, but it's understandable given the lighting conditions. The building on the right side of the image is slightly better exposed on the iPhone though, so it stands out better from the background. Also, the depth of field on the S20 Ultra is more shallow than the iPhone 11 Pro because the sensor is larger, so the background is more out of focus than it is on the iPhone 11 Pro. To clearly see this, look at the card to my left or the writing on the blue banister. So this is a feature that a lot of people have been talking about on the Ultra, and it's a double-edged sword because on one hand, it's really good in providing a natural depth of field in the background, and the bokeh looks great, and it kind of replicates like this DSLR effect where it feels really good without having to use live focus mode. But then the bad aspect is that, unlike a DSLR, it's one aperture. It doesn't have the ability to change between apertures, so when you're taking a close-up of an object, because it has this shallower plane of focus, oftentimes images look a little bit soft because only a piece of the object is in focus. So the S10 had a dual aperture, and basically what that meant is you can kind of get the best of both worlds, where it could pick between the two apertures depending on the scenario. But with the S20 Ultra, not only did they get rid of that dual aperture mode, but also the sensor is larger. So the combination of those two things means that there's a lot of photos where it looks almost a little bit soft because only part of it is in focus. But if you're mainly taking photos of people, you're going to kind of benefit from this because it adds this really nice background blur. This is going to continue to become more apparent as we move through these samples, so I'm going to move on to the next one. This next image was also taken in the 108 megapixel mode, and going forward, if I don't mention it, you'll see it where I write the name of the camera. All right, so this photo is not perfectly framed. As I said, I did my best, but I don't always nail it, and I'm sorry. But it still is going to prove the point of the depth of field thing. So you can see in this photo that only a part of the bunny is in focus on the S20 Ultra, whereas on the iPhone 11 Pro, a lot of it is in focus, so it just seems like a much sharper image, even though the S20 Ultra is actually pretty sharp, because when you look at the place where it focused, it nailed it, but the overall image looks like softer just because only a smaller part of the image is in focus. So that's what you'll see here. Otherwise, the color tone looks really awesome, and they both did a good job with exposure. Then I did a portrait mode test outdoors, and with portrait mode, you do not have the ability to use the 108 megapixel mode, so it's using the 12 megapixel mode, and this is to emulate blurred background. So as I said, this has really good natural blurred background, but sometimes you want a really more prominent version of that, and then live focus comes in handy. So I snapped that on both these phones. And what I noticed is that the S20 Ultra did really well with the overall image, but skin smoothing is here again. So even when beauty mode is turned off, the skin is still a little bit soft on the pictures from the Ultra. Kind of a bummer. Hopefully this is something that the software update will improve, so I'm not gonna bash it too much. It's something that I've noted, and I hope it gets improved. The iPhone 11 Pro, obviously the sharpness is there on the skin. It's definitely a software thing though, so it should be really easy for Samsung to fix if they want to, and then these images would kind of be on par with each other. Otherwise, speaking about other aspects of the image, the color tone of the S20 Ultra looks a little bit off to me, but the edge detection looks a lot more natural than it does on the iPhone 11 Pro. So it's kind of a toss-up. Oftentimes with the S20 Ultra, you'll see that the skin tone goes to a more like yellowish pale hue, whereas the iPhone 11 Pro goes to a more orangey hue. So it's kind of personal preference with which one you prefer. I often prefer the skin tone more so on the iPhone 11 Pro. I think it's a little bit more flattering, but sometimes it overdoes it and then you look like straight up orange. And then that's not a good thing. All right, this next image is a low light test. So this is really where you're gonna start to see the benefits of pixel binning. So I took this image in both 108 megapixels and in 12. And when we look at the 108 megapixel shot, it actually looks pretty good. The colors are awesome, the exposure looks pretty good on the main sign, which is like the focal point. And if I just saw this image, I'd be like, wow, that's a pleasing picture. But then when you compare it to the iPhone 11 Pro, the iPhone 11 Pro has a lot more detail underneath the sign. Like you can actually see the facial expressions on the balloons inside the store. The 108 megapixel shot does not have that. So then I took it in 12 megapixels, and that shot had kind of the best of both worlds, where it looks really punchy and contrasty, but you can still see the detail in the balloon. So for this particular image, 12 megapixels is a much better option than the 108. Although I will say that the detail in the 12 megapixel image still does not match the detail that the iPhone 11 Pro gets in the window area and the shelf area, although I much prefer the color tone on the S20 Ultra to the iPhone 11 Pro. Honestly though, if I saw any of these three images on Twitter, I would be like, wow, that's a good picture. But I want to know which one you prefer, like what's your favorite out of these three? Let me know in a comment below, and we're gonna move over to some video testing. So with the S20 Ultra, one of the biggest improvements to its video setup is not the 8K video, but it is the super steady video. So video is now stabilized on another axis, and it really made a difference. So this first video test is taken without super steady on, and you can see that they're both kind of shaky and unusable. I sprinted down a highly populated street, and this is the result. And then I turned on super steady, and it's honestly incredible what it was able to do here. You do see some jitter in the background, like with the tree area, but it's actually a usable image. It doesn't like move side to side. I feel like the iPhone 11 Pro's video is a little bit nauseating to watch, whereas the S20 Ultra is definitely usable. And this is kind of putting the camera to the extreme where I'm like sprinting. If you don't put the camera to the extreme and you're just like holding it at a concert or you're walking a little bit, the fact that it's so good at this extreme will mean that it will be pretty good not at the extreme. So that was really impressive to me. It's not available in 4K mode though, which is a bummer. So if you want super steady, you gotta use 1080p. And then I took some front-facing video, and the video looks decently good. Okay, this is a front-facing video test. I just did a running test, so everyone around me like thinks I'm crazy. But this is your video quality test. The S20 Ultra, again, has some skin smoothing. Hopefully that also gets fixed in the update. But in terms of microphone quality, I think that I prefer the S20 Ultra. It sounds a little bit bassier to me, which I really tend to fancy. It definitely is like a fuller, nicer sound. But the iPhone 11 Pro, I think, has a little bit nicer skin in terms of detail. And then I took a selfie test, and in this particular one, I want you to notice the sharpness in my hair. It looks really good. It's very sharp in my hair, but my face is pretty smooth. But the fact that my hair is sharp shows that there could be potential if there's an update that gets rid of skin smoothing. There's potential to get a lot of detail in my face. So fingers crossed for that. In my personal experience, I found that the 40 megapixel shots were not really that much better than the 10 megapixel shots, and actually in lower light scenarios, the 10 megapixel shots were better, as I mentioned earlier in this video. So I would probably keep it on that mode for the majority of the time that I'm taking a selfie. Plus, it's a selfie, so I don't necessarily need 40 megapixel pictures from the front-facing camera, although I know some people are like selfie fanatics, and then that is really nice to have. Then I headed back indoors for a low light test at a restaurant, and this picture I took in the 108 megapixel mode to see how that would fare in lower light. The shallower depth of field comes into play here again, so the iPhone 11 Pro's image has more of the object in focus when compared to the S20 Ultra, and it also is a brighter image, so I do definitely prefer the iPhone 11 Pro here, although I do like the color tone that the S20 Ultra produces. All right, another low light test, but this one I did with pixel binning, and it was a picture of mints, and they both did a pretty good job here. I like the color tone on the Ultra, but in terms of accuracy, the iPhone 11 Pro definitely is the more accurate color tone, but I think that the cooler tone fits the scene personal preference again. In terms of sharpness, they both look pretty sharp, but the iPhone 11 Pro I think has a little bit more of the mints in focus than the S20 Ultra, but it's pretty comparable. Then I took a low light portrait mode test of a glass, and this is where the S20 Ultra actually really excelled. The iPhone 11 Pro could not figure out what the subject of this image was, and I had to actually back up and take it at a different angle to get the glass in focus. And the edge detection is actually totally messed up on the iPhone 11 Pro, whereas the S20 Ultra handled it pretty well. So that was impressive. A lot of times smartphones have trouble with clear objects, and this is definitely a case where the iPhone 11 Pro did. So I was definitely really impressed by the S20 Ultra's image here in comparison to the iPhone 11 Pro. Then I headed back outdoors for another portrait mode test, and this one is interesting because the S20 Ultra looks sharper and less grainy than the iPhone 11 Pro, but the skin smoothing is pretty significant, and it also went to a really purplish tone. The iPhone 11 Pro is a little bit too yellow here for my preference. I would kind of like them to meet in the middle and pick a skin tone that is not extremely cool and purple, but also not pick a skin tone that's really orangey and yellow. So I would kind of like something right in the middle. And again, the skin smoothing is here. It's not as bad when it has like adequate light, but it seems like anytime it detects a person, it smooths out the skin a little bit. Another outdoor test, and this one is really interesting. They both look really good from a quick glance, but here's where details matter. In the way back of the photo, there's a restaurant called La Taqueria, and on the iPhone 11 Pro, the text is readable. On the S20 Ultra, it's much more blurry. And I have a theory on why. The S20 Ultra tends to pick too long of a time to keep the shutter open in night mode. So any handshake is obviously then going to affect the image more so than it would if the shutter was faster, whereas the iPhone 11 Pro picked a shutter speed that I think was a little bit faster, so the movement of my hand did not affect the image as much as it did on the S20 Ultra, and because of that, the iPhone 11 Pro's image just looks sharper and better overall. The Ultra definitely won this next test though. The shallower depth of field really paid off here. On the iPhone, more of the background and the lights are in focus, but on the Ultra, the lights and the people in the back are more blurred, which makes this photo feel like it was taken on a more expensive camera. The skin tone is still a little bit too pale for my taste, but the sharpness across the image looks really good on the S20 Ultra. And the skin smoothing is really not as prominent here because it's an 108 megapixel shot. My skin is still less detailed than on the iPhone though. Alright, so that's the initial test of the iPhone 11 Pro and the Ultra. Of course, I'll update you as we get updates, but I want to know which one you preferred. Vote in the poll above which one you preferred in most of the images. I think that the Ultra has a really awesome setup, but it's going to take Samsung a couple months to really refine their software for this new hardware. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you want to see a full review of the Ultra, you should click right here. And if you want to see a video on the regular S20 and the S20 Plus, you should click right here. Subscribe right here, and I'll catch you guys all in the next video with some more tech content. Thank you for watching. Bye.